Time now for our Listen Up segment when we debate an issue of public interest. Tonight's proposition comes from journalist Ruby Zajac, who is a contributing editor to Skotia Media.
It's time to abolish private schooling in Scotland. Segregating rich and poor is not in the best interests of any of our country's children. What we learn at school goes far beyond grades and exams, and everyone does better in fully comprehensive education systems. Just look at Finland. Private schools perpetuate an unequal class system. Let's build a fairer future. We need equal education in Scotland.
And Ruby is here to debate her arguments with Rod Grant, who's the head teacher of Clifton Hall School, which is an independent school in the west of Edinburgh. Ruby, around 30,000 kids in private schools in Scotland. That's around 4% of children. I mean, is this really such a big issue?
I think the issue is more in how those children go on to be represented in positions of power in our society. On a UK level, we've got 74% of judges being privately educated, we've got 32% of MPs, and even in the Scottish Parliament, we've got 20% of MSPs being privately educated, which is just a disproportionate representation. So that is why I think the issue is bigger than the number 4%.
Rod, would you not accept that paying for a superior standard of education for a child creates an unequal society?
I think if that was strictly true, then perhaps you could argue that. But I think that's a caricature of the reality. I think we're almost talking about the private sector, maybe in the 60s and 70s, but the independent sector in Scotland is very different to that. I mean, I've got a school of 450 pupils, and I have 63 children receiving financial support to be here. I have children in the past that have lived in social housing, single-parent families. I mean, actually, what we're trying to do is create a fairer and more equal society, certainly not being divisive. The caricature of the posh private school is honestly long gone. Indeed, all the teachers, bar two, I think I've got 41 full-time teachers, have all worked in the state sector, including myself. So it's not that we're trying to be, somehow divisive or different. I mean, it's a very different reality now.
Ruby, what's your response to that? I mean, you're describing a caricature of children that are privately educated.
Well, I don't think I'm seeking here in any way to specifically target the children that go to private schools. The problem is with the system. And I think that, what Rod describes in terms of building a more equal society and overcoming those divisions by having a more comprehensive system that brings in children from different backgrounds, that is the system that I think we should seek to create, but not just in Rod's school. We should be creating that on a national level.
Rod, should children at the start of life, not start with a level playing field? And by, children having a private education, that's not a level playing field.
But, again, that kind of smacks in the face of reality. There are some fantastic local authority schools, but those local authority schools tend to be in areas where housing is expensive and parents will go and buy those houses so they can go to those schools. The reality is that if your child is particularly gifted at sport, you might then pay to go to a sports club to allow your child an opportunity. I think it's a false argument. I think what we're interested in is educating Scotland's children. And I, for one, am very keen that my school represents a society in which it operates.
What's your response to that, Ruby?
Your school is not even in walking distance of Edinburgh. I mean, how many people drive to that school? Is that really helping to address climate change? I just think, by the looks of your school, you take a holistic approach to education, you're not focused on exams, all those things are fantastic. And I really think that those ideas and that perspective and experience that you have would be a huge asset to the education department, to Education Scotland. And I think, we should be striving to tackle inequality in the state sector, and that the sector should integrate the private schools, bring the teachers and the staff and the expertise and the resources in so that it can more equally benefit everyone. I mean, comprehensive systems have been shown to raise the overall standard of education, and they bring people together. We want to create a more empathetic society, a less divided society, which is increasingly important with the rise of the far right globally, with Brexit. And none of that can happen while we keep having this inequality. We're about to incorporate the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scottish law, which says that children must have equal opportunity of education, which says that adults must do what is best for children. And I don't think it is in the best interest of children to be segregated based on their class and their parental wealth.
What about the idea of integrating private schools to make the comprehensive school system better, Rod?
Well, I mean, I don't really buy the idea that there's some kind of segregation going on. I mean, my school works with local primary schools. I know some of the independent schools in Edinburgh have very close working relationships with local authority schools. In fact, sometimes some of our schools will offer advanced hires that local authority schools don't, and vice versa. And we share the expertise and our facilities with each other. You know, in many ways, I think our model of education is, you know, a solution to a problem. We're not the problem itself.
But Rod,
and you know, and talking about sharing expertise and trying to be more involved, you know, I have, along with many other independent school heads and teachers, offered all kinds of assistance, both to Education Scotland and to government ministers. But as soon as they know that you're from an independent school, they then fear that looks as if somehow we are better. And that's really not the case.
But Rod, a lot of parents pay a lot of money for their children to go to your school, and that is a form of segregation, isn't it?
Yeah, but they're also paying taxes, you know, to be able to access, you know, the comprehensive system. You know, if the 30,000 children suddenly found themselves going to local authority schools, that would cost the government £195 million per annum. And that's without all the extra buildings that you would require.
Well, yeah, but the resources, the assets in the private sector should be brought into the state sector. And I'm not saying I've got an economic plan of how that can be done, but it certainly can. And along with, you know, tax and spending reviews, reforms that build a fairer society, we can find the money, as we need to find the money, to fund education properly. And that is how we get a top of the world education system like Finland, where they pay teachers better, all teachers have master's qualifications, and learning starts later, and they do early intervention. You know, it's part of a bigger package, but it starts at not having 15% of the capital city going to private schools and creating that division.
Rod, I'll let you respond. On you go.
Well, you know, I've always admired Finland. It's you know, when I've written articles in the past, I'm always praising what Finland has done with its education system. But Finland's a very different society. First of all, it's probably the highest per capita rate in Europe in terms of income. It has the lowest divorce rate in Europe. And of course, every school can follow its own curriculum and sets its own agenda.
We're going to have to leave it there. Fascinating discussion, Ruby and Rod. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us.